Welcome to another episode of Top Lines and Tails, your weekly livestock podcast. As always, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Harbro, for their continued support. This week on Top Lines and Tails, we go back to the USA and talk to my good friend, Dr. Bob Hough there. Bob, welcome back to the podcast.
Well, it's always fun to be on, and I always appreciate when you have me on. It's always an honor, so thank you.
Well, Bob, this week is someone that you've brought to my attention, and a fascinating story of a lady called Sal Forbes. And we're going to go back in and study a little bit of history of this wonderful woman, because she really is something that is interesting and fascinating to a lot of people. So let's just step back to the beginning of, to this story. We'll start with her husband, Waldo Forbes, and I think his family had been ranching in the West maybe since the 1890s, that'd be right, and Waldo took over the ranch sometime. Bob, tell us a bit about Waldo.
Waldo's family, they were from the East, but they bought the ranch in the 1890s, and Waldo took over management of the ranch. I mean, he was a full-time rancher from the 1930s, and then he married Sal in 1940, and she was also from the East, and boy, she came out sight unseen. Well, Waldo was very successful, and he was an excellent rancher, and they had a variety of, they did Shorthorns and Ayrshires. They milked a few cows, and they had Rambouillets, I think, and they tried various things before they finally settled on Red Angus.
Okay, Red Angus we'll go into, and it's Sal that we really want to focus on today anyway, and she is the very first lady, I think, to have her portrait added to the prestigious the Saddle and Sirloin Gallery there in Kentucky, which is pretty much the highest honor in the U.S. livestock industry, isn't it, Bob? And I think you were involved in putting that packet together for her.
Yeah, I did, and we ran it, I think, 3 or 4 years, and we wondered whether they would ever put a woman in, and finally they did, and got her portrait added in 2008, and that was really quite an honor. But to give you a viewpoint on Sal, though, she didn't want mentioned in the ceremony, in the banquet, that she was the first woman. She just wanted to be another producer. So that's the kind of person she was. But yeah, she if there was anybody that should have been the first woman, it should have been her.
Well, you're right, and man, woman or other, it's a fantastic honor, as I said, to get the portrait in there. It does recognize some of the greatest cattle breeders in the USA over a long period of time. Is there 300 or 400 portraits in there, Bob? Is there something like that?
Right. Yeah, there's about 300 portraits. I mean, it goes back to the Calling brothers and Hugh Watson and William McCombie on through, and then we add one a year gets added. But it has all the old masters from starting in Great Britain on through, and it's a wonderful collection.
It's somewhere I'm desperate to go and see one day. Hopefully I'll get an invite in there to go and take a look at it. And let's just go back. Let's pick up with Sal and go back to the beginning, because it's not just Sal, but she's got a massive family history behind her, hasn't she? And I believe wasn't her family were the very earliest British settlers in America?
Yeah, one of her ancestors came over. The first permanent British colony in what would become the United States, in the British colonies, was Jamestown in Virginia, the Virgin Queen, and so it was in 1607, and one of her ancestors came over as an indentured servant in 1609 to Jamestown, and spent 7 years, and went back to Britain, England, and I think 1616, and then was hired by the company that was sponsoring the Pilgrims, the Puritans that were coming over to start one of the next major colonies or settlements, and they hired him to accompany them in 1620. So he signed that pact, and so he was the two basic settlements from the Great Britain that happened in the United States. He was involved in both of them, and he stayed, brought his family on the second time with the Pilgrims, and stayed from that point on. He stayed here in the North America.
I'm just looking back at my history. And would that be the Mayflower? Was that the boat he came on?
He came over on the Mayflower, exactly.
Wow. What a history that is to start with. And then didn't one of his descendants go on, I believe, and signed the Treaty of Independence? This is some history lesson we're getting here, Bob.
Yeah, that is. He there was a Boston Massacre, and that's where he first. It was Robert Treat Paine was his name, and the Paine family. And there was the Boston Massacre because they were getting kind of fired up about taxes, and over here, and they wanted representation because people who came over were kind of a little bit rebellish to begin with, to come to the North America. They wanted land, or they wanted religious freedom, and so they were a little antsy kind of people, and they were snowballing a bunch of British troops that were in Boston, and the troops fired on them, and so they had a trial, and Robert Treat Paine, he was a prosecutor, and then John Adams, who was our second president, he defended them. So they wanted a real defense, and so they some of them got for manslaughter, but anyway, then he got on the Continental Congress, and he was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, which split our colonies from Great Britain.
So what a man. So there's two in his history, and I think we skip down to more generations, and there's more of this family, isn't there? Sal's grandfather, I think, he did a fair bit.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he started out, he was he went to Harvard, which is one of our great institutions, and he was in the first intercollegiate sporting event ever held in the United States in 1852 between Harvard and Yale, which is another one of our great old institutions, and in rowing. And so they had a match, and it's been going on ever since. But that was the very first. Harvard won, so he won. It was the very first intercollegiate sporting event. So, and I mean, it just kind of goes on from there. I mean, he was when we went into the Civil War in 1860, he was the youngest major general in the Civil War, and which is quite a feat. And he commanded a division of black troops, and it was severely wounded at one point, and through the bravery of his troops was saved. And have you ever heard of about movie Glory over there?
Glory, yeah.
Yeah, Robert Goldshaw, who also had Colonel Robert Goldshaw, who had a division of black troops, or a regiment of black troops, and was killed. He went after the war and retrieved his sword for the family he was grieving. So, it's really fascinating leadership and commitment, and gosh, it's really an interesting story. So, and Sal still has a sword. Wow.
Okay, and you say, of course, the inter-college rowing match there, we have a similar thing between Oxford and Cambridge in England, and it is a massive. It's a massive thing for these universities to take on each other, and he said he started that and then won it, and then didn't he get into sailing then, Bob?
Well, he did get into sailing, but he did first invest in railroads right at the right time. I mean, right when they were about to take off, and our very first railroads were about the same time as in Great Britain in the 1830s, the very, very first ones. But, they didn't really take off till around the Civil War. And he invested basically all their money into the railroads, and that paid off pretty handsomely. And so they were fairly well to do from that point on. And then he got into sailing, and he defended the America's Cup 3 times. So that was a kind of a pretty good, and that was between Great Britain and the United States. a sailing yachting match, and that's back when they were on open water with regular sail ships. Now they have these I don't know what the heck they are. They don't look like sailing ships
They're
at all.
like airplanes nowadays,
Yeah,
aren't they?
yeah,
But
they're in all metal and yeah, but and and then one of his sons, Frank Payne, was he designed airplanes during World War One, and then afterwards he started designing yachts afterwards, and also some yachts that tried out for the America's Cup. So they were very much into sailing, and the other kind of thing he had is he had an estate west of Boston, and he was very much into raising some great sulky horses.
Okay.
Yeah, and so he had a variety of sporting interests, you might say.
Certainly sounds like an accomplished sportsman as well as an accomplished soldier, and accomplished everything just about. And as I said, to defend the America's Cup 3 times, I'm not sure, I don't know my America's Cup history, but to be on the team that's defended it 3 times, can't be too many people that are in that history book, I don't suppose, Bob. And as you said, with breeding horses as well, and then would he get into farming himself?
He had a variety of things. He had quite a bit of land. He had about 1,000 acres, but it was more of a summer estate. So they had an orchard. They had a small herd of really pretty good Ayrshires and Guernseys, and the sulky horses were their main thing they bred. And then, on that amount of land, they did most everything on it. And but Sal was not involved with the agriculture at that point. Okay. That was being done separately from Sal's interests at that time. So she really didn't get any agricultural background coming out of that, although her grandfather, Charles Payne, had quite a large farm for their summer.
Okay, and then we talk about her father, John Payne, who fought in the Spanish-American War. I mean, these guys are soldiers and another sportsman, I think.
Yeah. He and his brother, Sumner Payne, they were in the first modern Olympics in 1896 in Athens, Greece, and it was at that time it was pretty loose. Kind of, if you wanted to get there, you were on the team kind of stuff. So, but they went over and they were both in pistol shooting, the two, because John Payne sailed over and picked up his brother who was in Paris at the time, and they went to Greece and competed in the first modern Olympics, and both won what would be gold medals. At the time, they got laurel wreaths for their heads, so they didn't get any gold out of it. But anyway, it was that was quite accomplished. So there was only about 15, 20 people on the team representing America, and they were 2 of them, and that was quite a event and quite a feather in their cap.
What a family full of achievers, and it is unbelievable. And we'll go on to Sal, and then you knew Sal, I think, through your association with the Red Angus. We'll maybe come on to your association with that part in a minute. But tell us a little bit more then about Sal Forbes.
Well, Sal was first, she had a backbone, and you can tell that from her family history. She and when she married Waldo, and at Christmas time, I guess it had been in 1939, and then she moved in January 1940 to Wyoming, and never been to the ranch before, and that's where she spent the rest of her life. And so that's quite an adventuresome person to take that on and to uproot yourself from kind of a comfortable life in the East and go to a ranch. A large, extensive ranch, with about 1,000 cows. It was a big operation.
Sounds like a girl looking for adventure by the sound of it to me.
Oh yeah, and she was involved. She got right in and was involved in everything. I mean, the branding. She wanted to be with them. So if they went out on roundups, she got on a horse and went out with them. And so she learned the business. She wanted to learn the business from the ground up, and that's what she did.
And she obviously met Waldo there. In 1940, of course, we're into the Second World War then. So what were the circumstances there? How did she get over there?
Well, I mean, we didn't get into the war until 41,
Okay.
at the end of 41. So we were a little later than you guys. Unfortunately, you were in for a long time and had a rougher time. Well, we all had a rough time. That was a terrible war against some terrible people. But what happened during World War II, though, was when they got interested in Red Angus, and the story there was American Angus Association's by far their largest event was at the International in Chicago. That was their big promotional event, and that's where their biggest budget item was, and that's where they were housed. And that shut down and during World War II, and actually became where they were keeping supplies in all those facilities. Okay. So American Angus decided, Hereford owned the West. They decided to take those resources and put them to the National Western in Denver, and got everybody that would normally show in Chicago to come out to Denver, and they tried to erode Hereford's market, and they were somewhat successful at it. But Waldo and Sal they liked Angus quite a bit when they saw them, but they didn't like the little fat cattle, overfed cattle. They thought there had to be a better way, and that's the time when those new PhDs from I don't know whether you ever heard of Sir Ronald Fisher from over there, was a quantitative geneticist, and Sewell Wright and Dr. Jay Lush. They trained, like Jay Lush trained 137 PhDs, and he populated the whole United States with quantitative geneticists. And one of them was Stonecker at Colorado State. And so the very first, he told them about this new thing of performance testing, and they bought it. They were the first herd that implemented performance testing, and they started putting that Red Angus herd together in 1945. And Tompkins from the American Angus Association actually helped them find some good Red Angus cattle. Of course, he was a good former Penn Stater. So I always have to get that in, but that was a department, and he helped them out and found some good cattle. And they also had a Black Angus herd, and they wanted to show ones that were raised via selection for performance versus a typical selection of the time, more of a show ring thing, and they wanted to compare them. And so they thought using the red cast-offs would do that best.
Okay, I can understand that to put a bit of contrast in them, give them an identity, and they took that identity forward. And I think Waldo, along with a chap called George Chiga, I think they single-handedly started the Red Angus in the USA, along with Sal as well, of course.
Yeah, it was it was 1954 is when they got started, and Waldo and George Chiga, they wrote the rules and regulations, and that you had to have a weaning weight, and they also had inspection because at that time confirmation was part of our quality grading system, and also to check there wasn't white in front of the navel and those kinds of things, and so confirmation was important at that point because it, like I said, it was, if you were choice, you had to have choice confirmation, and so you had to have a weaning weight, and they put all these performance things in, and also a commercial focus. And then Sally Forbes, and Miss S. Taylor McDaniel wrote the bylaws. And they got all kinds of bylaws put together from everywhere they could find. And they put together one that was membership driven at the time. It's floated away from that since then. But yeah, those Chiga and the Forbeses were the backbone of it. And can I tell you just a little bit about George? Because talk about the opposite of the Forbeses. He came from as poor a family as you could come from. Yeah, they got along really great. And then, but George's family was very poor, and they came from Eastern Europe, and they homesteaded in the prairie of Canada. And I mean, they had a big family, and they couldn't feed them all. And George was a great big guy, big tough guy, and he was got really big and was eating a lot. So they kind of sent him on the road when he was still in junior high to go out and make a living on his own. And he became a bouncer, and he took up boxing, and he ended up representing the and wrestling and he ended up in the 1936 Olympics representing Canada as a heavyweight wrestler, and in the Berlin Olympics. And he also played professional football for the Regina Rough Riders, and so he was and the really funny thing was Oklahoma State, and this in the United States, it's in the South Central. They recruited him to play football and wrestle for Oklahoma State, and so we're going to have NCAA. That's the National Collegiate Athletic Association, and they oversee the rules over here. So we still need to have an investigation because Oklahoma State pulled a guy that had never graduated, never even got to high school, played professional football, and he also wrestled. But anyway, he came down, he got an education in animal science, and he got a master's in genetics. And then at night, he got a law degree. And then he went into World War II to get citizenship. So, I mean, he was another Charger. He just came from a very humble background. So you had these two really A-type people, the Forbeses and the Chigas, that put it together.
Fantastic. I mean, this is just a story you couldn't make up, to the association of these people together. And that would be, as you said, the mid-50s. And then they start the Red Angus Association. And why did they do that? I mean, I can hear what you're saying about the Red Angus, but it's breaking away from a long tradition of Black Angus, of course. And they must have met some serious resistance from the traditional Angus guys, surely. What do they have to do to get that job going forward?
Well, you have to switch out of the idea of it being a breed, and because of what it was a philosophy, and the red cattle were just a tool to implement the philosophy. So if you think about it in that way, it makes sense. And for people like George Chiga, he could afford them. The Forbeses could go out and buy the cattle they wanted, but George, he didn't have any money, and the red cattle, he could go out and buy, really good cattle that he could afford to implement. He was into line breeding and performance testing and other breeders like that. And then there was also some breeders in the South that wanted them for heat tolerance with the red. So it all kind of made sense, and these were throwaway cattle that they get inexpensively, and then they could implement the philosophy. So
wow, okay, that makes a lot of sense when you put it that way. It's like we've talked about some great breeders on this podcast in the past, and people who sort of earned their spurs learning how to breed rabbits and various things, and start with some animals you can afford, and put your philosophy together. But it sounded like the Red Angus carried on, Bob, and went from strength to strength, didn't it? And I think performance, as you said just now, was probably the way the whole thing was driven.
Yeah, they were the very first performance organization to exist in the United States, period. And the Forbeses were the first performance herd to exist, and the Red Angus Association was the first performance organization to exist in 1954. So, yeah, and I mean, we were in the heart of the belt buckle showing with everything, so yeah, they were as opposite as you could be. They were really renegades, and it was a whole new way of thinking. So you had to have some real strength of conviction to go that way. Absolutely. And Sal was one of the great promoters of it. She would have field days that people would come from all over to, and had Jim Bondsma there, and she was one of the big promoters of performance.
Sure, and we talk about the Red Angus a little bit further down there. Is it the red gene is recessive? Is it a sort of homozygous red cattle that were breeding red cattle, or would there be some throwbacks or crossovers? How do they keep them red?
They're recessive. They're homozygous red. If you breed them if you put a black gene in there, they will be black. And in some cases they do move some black genes over into the red gene pool, but it takes a while to make them homozygous red, because of the probabilities, to get what you really want. It's a can be a slow progress. And the other thing is the black population is a little different breed anymore, because the red population is more of a maternal oriented breed, and the black Angus population. I mean, this is a grand generalization, because there's all different kinds of cattle in different herds. But if you take this big generalization, they are more into supplying the brand, which is certified Angus beef. So they're a little bit more terminal, and the Red Angus are more maternal. So that's in general, more stability, more longevity, those kinds of things.
We're talking, obviously, they went on to set up the association, which both Waldo and George and Sal got involved in. But would there be a lot of resistance from the black people there? Would they be dissed as being imposters or something different, or trying to go a different direction? Would there be animosity in a big way?
Well, yes, there was. I mean, they were considered genetic defects. The red was a genetic defect. So, I mean, they didn't have any time for them, and they tended to be very large herds, and they tended to just pass over the purebred market and go. They're the market for the vast majority of the history of the breed has been selling bulls to commercial producers. Sure. And commercial producers, they were a ready audience for what Red Angus was selling, with the performance and the economics. But if you wanted to, there was no high dollar purebred business in the Red Angus. That didn't exist.
Okay, so it's very much a commercial market, as you said, and looking a bit more down the maternal line. And Waldo was the first president, I believe, of the association when it formed, and Sally was first executive secretary. So they really were. They started the association, and then they took on to run it themselves.
Yeah, that's right. But unfortunately, Waldo died very early. He died in January 1956. So he was president. And then George Chico had been vice president, took over as president. But that's when Sal took over the ranch. And I mean, you want to talk about a backbone. Here she lived out there since 1940, but she took over, a very large, extensive ranch, 1,000-cow ranch. She was a woman. She was with a new breed, a new philosophy with performance, and what was truly a man's world at that point. And I mean, you got to have a backbone that is titanium to do that.
I think she had a big family as well to go with it, didn't she?
Oh, she had 7 kids at the time. The youngest one was a toddler when Waldo died. So, yeah, I mean, she had her hands full times 3. But, I mean, she was up for it. She took it on full force.
Okay. Yeah, as I said, you knew her when your time, Bob, as the CEO of the Red Angus in your later, well, in his later form anyway. And give us a few more stories about Sal, because this podcast is about her. And yeah, I've got nothing but admiration for this lady.
Well, I mean, let me give you a couple of examples of when the type change occurred in the 70s, late 60s and the 1970s. I was told by Jim Leachman there were no bigger, faster growing Angus of any color than what Forbes has had. And I mean, they were it. They had the most, the best Angus on the planet, basically. And at that point, there was also a lot of birth weight was coming with those cattle. And so they switched to lower the birth weight for their commercial customers. So they actually backed those cattle back some when everybody else was charging towards where they were. They actually backed them back. So, I mean, that takes a lot of brass, to go in the opposite direction right when you're at the peak. But if your commercial customers are having too much calving difficulty, so I mean, that's the kind of brass they had. And, one story is they had a heifer that I guess was flat out would be national champion. And Jim Leachman saw her down there. He went down and visited, and he tried to every which way he could to buy her, but she had 125-pound birth weight. And Sal didn't want to have the Beckton Stock Farm was the name of the ranch, associated with anything with 125-pound birth weight. So she would not sell her. And then Daryl Schuler, which is Schuler Ranch, is another famous, 1,000-cow ranch and Red Angus ranch here. And Daryl was visiting with Jim Leachman, and he said, "Well, I can buy anything. It's just how much money you want to spend." And so Daryl said, "Jim, do you want a partner? I'll go down and buy that heifer. We'll win national champion." And so Jim said, "You can't buy her," and he just ripped out and signed a check and said, if you can buy her, you fill out the number." And he went down and did everything he could, but Sal wouldn't sell that heifer for any money. And a few years later, Daryl asked where she was. She said, "Oh, I don't know. She's up on the mountain somewhere," because they trail the cattle with heifer calves up onto the mountain to graze for the summer. So she just went into the herd and became a nondescript cattle. So, I mean, her convictions were her convictions. There was no sway.
The principled person, that's for sure. It'd be nice to think everybody's got that principle. I think we've all got a bit of chivalry in us somewhere, but fantastic to stand behind the principles. And Bob, as I said, you took on the CEO, and we featured yourself on our podcast in the past. And but you took on the CEO of the Red Angus Association, and Sal would still be involved in it at that point, would she?
Oh yeah, and I'll tell you what, if she could keep a meeting lively, because she would ask pointed questions, whether you were at convention or wherever. I mean, she would ask the tough questions, and she didn't mind. She would get up and ask darn near anything. So she always kept things lively, and she always and she didn't mind. Sometimes. If it was a foolish question, sometimes she didn't mind. She just wanted to know. So she always had this curiosity. She was a great supporter of the juniors, very commercially focused, and just a great supporter of what Red Angus was about. So, I mean, she's always someone you could count on. I sat with her at her sale for, I don't know, about all of my tenure as the exec. I would go up and we would sit together at their sale, and it was fun. She would have the sale list, and gosh, she was a charger, and she lived very humbly. She lived kind of in a cabin, and it was, and so it was. She was not a pretentious person in any way, shape, or form.
Sounds like a great character, and it's lovely to hear about these characters. And that's something we've been trying to do on Top Lines and Tales, is look at characters in livestock. And I mean, that's one incredible person there, Bob. I really appreciate you highlighting and bringing her to my attention and to the attention of our listeners. And sadly, she died while you were still there in that role, Bob.
Well, it was afterwards. She was in ill health when she had a stroke when she got the Portrait Award in 2008, and it wasn't too many years after that she passed away, sadly. But luckily, we got her honor before that, and she did some other great things in her life as her sons came on and took more responsibility of the ranch. She did some great things. There was a lot of strip mining for coal in Wyoming, and she got some environmental regulations passed in Congress that, she really put a lot into it and became an expert to make sure the land was reclaimed. And there was a bill that reclaims and cleans up acid mines, spillage and those kinds of things. And actually, up till this last time it passed, it used to, when these coal companies went bankrupt, they would pay the coal workers their health care that they were promised, as well as their retirement. But unfortunately, that they lost that in the last bill. But it was only like 35 cents a ton that they got out. And the other thing, she was into alternative health, and so I would go out there. It'd be 2 sales in a row, Buffalo Creek and Beckton. So I'd be there in Sheridan for about 4 days, and then I would go up to Billings and for Leachman sales, which was a couple days long. And she always had somebody there to heal me because I had back problems and some other things. So she was into alternative health very much. And so she always had somebody there to work on me for 4 days whenever I was there. And, sometimes they were pretty good and sometimes they weren't, but it was always kind of fun. And she was quite a person, and that was so fun that she always had somebody there to get me straightened out. So
she literally had your back there, Bob. She literally had your back.
Yeah, that's right. It was fun. She was a fun lady.
Somebody I think I would love to have met, and it's absolutely, as I said, brilliant that you've highlighted her to myself and to our listeners, and I think somebody that's well heralded and fantastic that she is not only the first lady to be in the Saddle and Sirloin Club on the Waldo, but probably the only one still, Bob.
Well, there's one other woman that has gotten it, Minnie Lou Bradley in Texas, Angus breeder who was president of the Angus Association, and she was certainly deserving of it, really deserving of it. But there's only been two, and there was quite a distance between Sal and Minnie Lou, and so there needs to be. We still need to get more in there, that's for sure, and get a little bit more balance. And getting these women that back in when it was such a paternal man's world. They really had to be special. They had to be twice as good as the men, and people like Sal were twice as good as the men. There was just no doubt about it.
That's brilliant, and it is something I would take criticism of with the top lines and tails with our characters. They do tend to all be male, and it's fantastic to hear of a woman taking on that role in a man's world, and an encouragement, I think, to a lot of youngsters. Bob, it'll be the same on your side of the pond as it is on ours, where there's a lot of young ladies now getting involved in showing the cattle and getting into getting themselves to the top, and this is a fantastic encouragement to them as to what you can achieve. As you said back then, you need to work twice as hard. Hopefully now you don't have to work twice as hard, but a great chance to give them opportunities and a role model, should I say, to some of these young girls and young ladies going into the cattle business.
And they need role models because we are seeing way more women in the industry. We see here in the United States, we're seeing way more women judging shows now. It's not uncommon to have a woman judging a show. Before, it was really rare to have a woman judging a show, and so we're seeing more that are very integral in their operation, not just keeping bucks, but out working cattle. And so it is changing, but it had to take these pioneers, the Sally Forbes and the Minnie Lou Bradleys to make that happen and to give the role models that they needed.
Brilliant. And I don't think we've quite redressed the balance there on the top lines and tails there, but that's fantastic there to give the ladies a little bit of a show on the front of the podium there, Bob, and really appreciate you bringing that to my attention. And that's been fantastic to chat through what I would call a legend that was Sal Forbes and the family before her.
Oh, I wish you could have met her. I wish everybody could have met her.
Okay. Well, thanks, Bob. Bob, that's brilliant. Thank you for your time, as always, and your enthusiasm with the top lines and tails. And we've had association now going on well over a year, maybe two, and there's plenty more out there. So I always appreciate your input into the Top Lines and Tails podcast.
Oh, it's so much fun, and we've been working a little bit on some Angus projects too. So that's fun too. We've been documenting some Angus things together, and so gosh, we've been having some fun lately.
You're right, Bob. You're right. We are. We've got a few little projects on the go, and hey, watch this space. Some of that might just come out later on. But Bob, really appreciate your time, and thanks for being with us on Top Lines and Tails.
Well, thank you so much. It's been great, and again, it's always an honor for you to invite me.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Top Lines and Tails, your weekly livestock podcast. And as always, we'd like to mention our sponsors, Harborough, for their fantastic continued support. And don't forget that Harborough are trading in over 20 countries across the world, so all you Top Lines and Tails listeners can get in touch with them to find out more about what Harborough do there. Do look them up on the internet, on social media, and various other places, as well as, of course, contacting your local representative. And if you are on social media there, don't forget to look at the Top Lines and Tails Facebook page, where you'll find more information about this fascinating episode and other episodes and photographs and everything else, chats and all sorts. So please get involved with our social media presence there on Top Lines and Tails.